Your grandfather left you 40 acres and $74,000 in unpaid taxes. Everyone says this land is worthless.
Whispers echoed through the county about the rusted corrugated structure on the Pendleton property. For 4 decades, heavy chains and industrial padlocks guarded a secret long dismissed as a crazy old man's delusion. Developers laughed, calling the soil toxic and dead. Tomorrow, the chains would finally snap, rewriting history forever. Arthur Pendleton stood at the edge of the property line, his boots sinking into the dry, cracked earth of Bitter Creek, Colorado. The wind howled across the flat expanse, kicking up clouds of red dust that stung his eyes. Before him lay 40 acres of the most desolate, unforgiving land in the entire state. It was a barren stretch of scrub oak and fractured shale that hadn't seen a successful crop since the early 1970s. And now, it all belonged to him. His grandfather, Harrison Pendleton, had passed away 6 weeks earlier at the age of 92. Harrison had been a notoriously difficult man, a recluse who spent the last 40 years of his life patrolling this very perimeter with a shotgun and a scowl. To the town of Bitter Creek, Old Man Pendleton was a cautionary tale of isolation and paranoia. To Arthur, he was a distant memory, a grandfather who had stopped coming to family Thanksgiving dinners sometime during the Reagan administration. When the lawyer, a tired-looking man named Gregory Finch, read the will, Arthur hadn't expected much. He certainly hadn't expected to inherit the entire estate, which consisted of a dilapidated farmhouse, the 40 acres of dead earth, and a staggering tax lien of $74,000. The county has been lenient because of your grandfather's age, Finch had explained, sliding a thick manila folder across the mahogany desk. But with Harrison gone, they want their money. You have 30 days to settle the debt, Arthur, or the county seizes the property. Given the state of the land, you might just want to let them have it. Arthur couldn't afford a $74,000 tax bill. He was a high school history teacher, barely making mortgage payments on a modest 2-bedroom house in Denver. His wife Joanna was pregnant with their second child, and their savings account was hovering precariously close to zero. The logical choice was to walk away. But as Arthur stared across the desolate acreage, his eyes locked onto the anomaly of the property. Sitting about 200 yards behind the rotting farmhouse was a structure that defied all logic. It was a massive, windowless shed, roughly the size of an airplane hangar, constructed entirely of heavy-gauge corrugated steel. Unlike the farmhouse, which was crumbling under the weight of time, the shed was fortified. The base was poured, reinforced concrete. The double sliding doors at the front were secured by thick, hardened steel chains and 4 oversized industrial master locks that looked as though they had been welded shut by decades of rust. He built it in the summer of 1986. A voice called out behind Arthur. Arthur turned to see Thomas Gable walking toward him. Gable was a local real estate developer, a man whose expensive Italian suits always looked entirely out of place against the dusty backdrop of Bitter Creek. Gable represented Crestview Holdings, a shadowy corporate entity that had been buying up failed farms in the valley for the past 5 years. "Mr. Gable," Arthur said, his tone guarded. "I didn't hear your car pull up." "I have a quiet engine," Gable smiled, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. He stopped beside Arthur, staring out at the formidable steel shed. "Your grandfather was a fascinating man, Arthur. He hired a crew from out of state to pour that concrete foundation, paid them in cash. Once the steel went up, he fired them, put those locks on the doors, and never let another soul inside. 40 years. Not even the property tax assessor was allowed near it. He liked his privacy," Arthur muttered. "He was clinically paranoid," Gable corrected gently. "Listen, Arthur, I know about the tax lien. Gregory Finch is a practical lawyer, and I assume he told you the reality of your situation. This land is completely worthless. The soil is alkaline, the water table is dried up, and it's miles from the nearest highway. Then why do you want it?" Gable chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. "Crestview Holdings is playing the long game. We're acquiring acreage for a potential solar farm project. We need contiguous plots. Your grandfather's 40 acres are a roadblock in the middle of our map. I'm prepared to offer you $20,000 cash, right now, and my company will assume the entire $74,000 tax burden. You walk away with money in your pocket for your growing family, and zero debt." It was a lifeline. It was exactly what Joanna had begged him to do before he drove out here this morning. Take the money, sign the papers, and wash his hands of Harrison Pendleton's ghost. "I need a few days to think about it," Arthur said. Gable's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. "Arthur, the county's deadline is Monday. Today is Thursday. If you wait, you risk foreclosure, and you walk away with absolutely nothing. Let's head into town, right now, and get this notarized." "I said I need a few days," Arthur repeated, his stubbornness suddenly flaring. Something about Gable's eagerness rubbed him the wrong way. If the land was so worthless, why was the developer standing in the dirt, breathing down his neck? Suit yourself, Gable said, his voice dropping a full octave, shedding the friendly neighbor persona. But don't let sentimentality bankrupt you. And whatever you do, don't bother trying to open that shed. The county fire chief told me years ago he suspects your grandfather was hoarding volatile agricultural chemicals in there. It's likely a toxic hazard. With that, Gable turned and marched back to his sleek black SUV, leaving Arthur alone with the howling wind and the impenetrable steel fortress. Arthur walked slowly toward the shed. The closer he got, the more imposing it became. The chains were wrapped with deliberate precision, threaded through heavy steel brackets, welded directly into the doors. He reached out and touched one of the brass locks. The metal was freezing cold despite the afternoon sun. What were you hiding, old man? Arthur thought. And why is Thomas Gable so desperate to buy a toxic hazard? That night, Arthur stayed in the crumbling farmhouse. The electricity had been shut off months ago, so he relied on a battery-powered camping lantern and a heavy sleeping bag laid out on the dusty living room floor. The silence of the country was deafening, broken only by the groaning of the old house settling on its foundations and the occasional scuttle of a mouse in the walls. Joanna had called him at 8 o'clock, her voice crackling over the poor cellular connection. Arthur, please tell me you signed the papers, she had pleaded. The furnace at home is making that grinding noise again, and the baby is due in 4 months. We need that $20,000. We can't afford a crusade right now. I know, Joe, Arthur had sighed, rubbing his temples. I know we need the money, but Gable is hiding something. He practically chased me down in the dirt to get me to sign. If the land is just for a solar farm, he wouldn't be this aggressive. He warned me not to open the shed. He claimed it was full of toxic chemicals. Maybe it is, Joanna argued. Your grandfather was eccentric, Arthur. He lived in the middle of nowhere and alienated everyone. What if it is a chemical spill waiting to happen? If you open it and discover a hazardous